What is going on, Technically? My name is Billy the Squid, and leveling up in Elden Ring might be the single most important thing that you can do as a player to give yourself more success moving forward in the game. This is how your character increases strength outside of just increasing your weapons or changing your armor out. This is the way that your build comes to fruition. And today in this guide, I want to kind of break down what each of the stats do, where their soft caps are, where their hard caps are, and how they are going to interact with you as the player. So let's start off with the Vigor stat. Vigor is the health stat of the game. Every point that you put into Vigor will get you some health in return. And how much health is determined by how many levels you have put into Vigor prior. These games work on a hard and soft cap system, and I'm going to break down exactly what those caps are. So for the Vigor stat, it is really quite simple. From whatever level you start at up until level 40, you will be getting significant health returns. This is going to be a ramping system, so as you go up these levels towards 40, you will be getting more and more health per point until you hit 40. 1450 is the soft cap for the Vigor stat. At that point, the health that you are gaining is roughly going to get cut in half. You'll still get a decent amount of health, but it is not going to be nearly as much as you were getting up until you hit 40. And this is going to continue a downward trend up until you hit 60. Each point is going to get you slightly less health in return up until you hit the hard cap, or secondary soft cap, I guess it would be, because 99 is the hard cap where you stop gaining health altogether. But at 60, your health returns are pretty well going to get cut in half again, and it is going to downward trend until you max out the stat. So for my recommendation, get your health up to 40, and then if you have other stats that you need to allocate points into, I would do those before you would go past 40, but it is still a decent investment up until you hit 60. Moving on to the Mind stat. This stat just dictates how much FP you have. That is the blue bar that dictates how much your Ashes of War and your Spirit Summons and your spells, how many of those you can use, and it is filled up by your blue flasks. So for every point that you put into Mind, you are going to get some of this FP. And from whatever your base starting is, up until you hit 20 Mind, you are going to get 3 points of FP per level. From 20 all the way up until 50, you are going to get 6 points of FP per level. So this is the sweet spot for leveling up this stat. If you are going to be heavily using Ashes of War, which the game really wants you to do, and spells, you want to get to 20 as quick as possible, and then you can kind of adjust moving up to 50 based on your needs. And if you commit all the way up to 50, you'll be getting a whopping 8 points of FP from 50 to 55. And then from 55 onward, that's when it starts to ramp down. You'll be getting 2 to 3 points of FP moving forward all the way through the levels. Endurance is the next stat we're going to talk about, and it serves twofold functions. One, it increases your stamina bar. That is the bar underneath of your health bar. The more stamina you have, the more actions you're going to be able to do, whether that is dodge rolling, you're going to be able to block heavier attacks with a shield, you are going to be able to do more physical attacks and magic attacks and weapon arts. All of these things cost stamina. And for every point that you put into endurance, you are going to get 1 to 2 points of stamina. And this goes all the way up until you hit about 50 on the endurance stat, at which point you are going to get 1 stamina point every 3 to 4 levels moving forward. So I would never recommend pushing your endurance up past 50 at the most. Breaking it back down, endurance also serves to increase your maximum equipment load. This governs how much heavy armor and gear you can have. The higher this number, the more likely you are to be in a mid roll or a fast roll, depending on your armor classes. If you are trying to avoid heavy rolling, endurance is going to be a necessity, especially if you plan on using heavy equipment and heavy armor. And the way it works in this game is you get roughly 1.6 pounds of equipment load up until you hit about level 25. 25 seems to be the soft cap for this stat. From 25 to 30, you get 1 point of equipment load. And then from 30 to 60, it actually goes back up, and you get about 1.4 to 1.5 pounds of equipment load, all the way from 30 to 60. At which case, once you hit 60, you get about 1 pound per equipment load moving forward until you max out the stat. It's about 1 to 1.1 pound equipment load. So it's pretty consistent. It's a little weird that it has like a dip and then goes back up, but that is how the endurance stat works for both your stamina and your equipment load in Elden Ring. So let's break down the damage stats now. These are the stats that are going to determine how much damage your weapons do. Each weapon has a different scaling, so depending on what the scaling of your weapon is will determine how much you are getting out of these stats. For instance, if you have an S scaling strength weapon, each point of strength is going to get you a bigger return than if you had a C scaling strength weapon. So for the strength stat, you get pretty decent returns up until level 20. 20 is the first soft cap, at which case your returns start to slow down a little bit, but they stay pretty consistent up until you hit 40, at which case they slow down just a little bit more. It's not anything to really be concerned about. The soft caps are a lot softer for the damage stats in this game. So from 40 all the way up until 80, you are going to be getting at least a pretty decent amount of return. At 80, the damage per point goes down significantly, so I would not suggest putting any of the damage stats past 80. To keep in mind with strength, if you are two-handing a weapon, you get 1.5 of your strength total. So for instance, if you are two-handing a club and you have 20 strength, you will now be counted as having 30 strength for the damage scaling of that weapon. This only works with strength-based weapons. It's also worth noting that this 1.5 two-handing also goes to being able to equip weapons. If you have a weapon, such as what I have, that requires 30 strength to be able to use, but I only have 20 strength total, I get that 1.5 return, so that if I am two-handing this weapon, I am immediately able to actually use it effectively. Whereas when I'm one-handing it, I cannot. So keep that in mind. If you have a strength weapon that you want to use but you don't quite meet the stat requirement, you can still use it through two-handing. Moving on, the next stat that we are going to look into is the dexterity stat. This stat governs dexterity scaling weapons. So any weapon that, if it has an S scaling in dexterity, you're going to get more returns per point than if it has a C scaling in dexterity. And just like strength, the good returns come from whatever your base level is up until you hit 20, at which case you start getting slightly lower returns, but it keeps going pretty decently up until you hit 40. Then it goes slightly lower on returns, but still fairly decent all the way up until you hit 80, in which case the returns get cut significantly, and I would not recommend going past 80 in your stats. Moving on to intelligence, this is going to govern any magic scaling weapons. If you have a weapon that naturally scales off of intelligence, or if you use an Ash of War that gives you magic scaling, the intelligence stat is going to determine what that magic damage is going to be. Like the other stats, if you have an S scaling intelligence weapon, you are going to get more returns per point than a C scaling. This also governs the damage that your spells are going to do through catalysts. The scaling of these spells is determined by the catalyst you are holding. And again, the better the catalyst you have, the better returns you will get per point. And like the other stats, you get good returns up until you hit 20 intelligence, and then moving forward, it goes down a little bit, but not significantly, up until you hit 40. Then it hits another soft cap, and it will go up until 80 with slightly reduced returns, but still decent moving forward. And the last damage stat we are going to talk about is Faith. Faith is governed by weapons or your catalyst that scales off of Faith. So if you have an S scaling Faith catalyst or weapon, you're going to get better returns per point than if you had a C scaling. And just like the other stats, from base level, whatever you started with, up until 20, you get the best returns, in which case you hit the first soft cap. From 20 to 40, you get slightly diminished returns. Not bad, though. From 40 to 80, you get another diminishment in returns, but it is still pretty decent. At 80 forward, you get heavy diminishing returns. I would not recommend taking this stat above 80. Arcane is the final stat that we are going to talk about, and it is still a damage stat, but its primary focus is on item discoverability. For every point that you put into Arcane, you get 1 bonus point into Discovery. Discovery increases the drop rate of items from mobs. So if you are trying to farm up a specific material or an armor set or a weapon specifically, having a higher Discovery will give you more of a chance for those items to drop. As a damage stat, Arcane scaling items are few and far between, but they do exist, and they follow the same curve as the other damage stats. From 10 to 20, you get the best returns. From 20 to 40, you get slightly diminished returns. And then from 40 to 80, you get slightly more diminished returns, but they are still worth putting points into if you are going into an arcane heavy build. From 80 forward, I would not recommend it. The returns are cut significantly. Every stat that you put points into is going to increase your defensive power and your body just a little bit, but some of them have a few little quirks, such as every point you put into Vigor is going to heavily increase your immunity and your fire resistance. Endurance will increase your robustness. Strength is going to give you the best returns in physical defensive power. Dexterity really gives you nothing special in particular. Faith rocks nothing in particular. And oddly enough, Arcane gives you the best returns defensive-wise and body-wise in both the Vitality and the Holy stats. And that is how leveling up your character in Elden Ring will affect your build and your playstyle. If you found this video helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We are going to be doing more guides like this in the future. But until next time, Tentacrew, much love. Bye-bye.